Ever feel like a consultant doesn't know what they're talking about when it comes to operations? You need someone that knows what you're dealing with. That's the experience that today's sponsor, the Breckham Group, brings to the table. Built by operators and engineers, they help you bridge the gap between strategy and execution inside your distribution center. Learn more about how their proven framework called Precision Supply Chain Operations can bring faster performance, greater efficiency, and real ROI at breckhamgroup.com. That's BRECHAM group.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to have John Santagate on, and he is the Senior Vice President of Global Robotics at Infios. And we are going to talk about, you might have guessed it from his title, but we're going to talk about robotics. So we're going to dive into a little bit about what John's seeing out there in terms of the overall robotics landscape. And we're going to have a discussion too on humanoids, which some people love, some people don't like, from what I can gather out there. And we're going to hear a little bit about his thoughts and his view on what's happening there. So John has been on previously at one of the Manifest shows. So we're welcoming back here. So John, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Yeah, Kevin, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back here. I enjoy listening to the podcast, and I certainly enjoy the conversations when we get to have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get you back on, and definitely very interested to hear your perspective on what's going on these days from the robotics perspective in the warehouse. But the last time we talked to you actually was Körber Supply Chain, right? But you guys have rebranded to Infios now. So I guess tell us a little bit about what is Infios for those that are not familiar, and tell us a little bit about the rebranding too for people that weren't aware.
Yeah, for sure. So Infios is not a new home. It's a new name for where I've been for the past I just got a notification 6 years or so.
Okay, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Infios is the next step in the evolution of who Körber was, right? And Körber Supply Chain software, I should say, was the result of a series of acquisitions of supply chain execution technology solutions, High Jump software being one of the more known brands that has been part of the construct of the business. There's a couple things at play here, right? One is marketability. As we move towards that next step in our corporate journey, I like to jokingly say, although it's not quite a joke, it's a lot easier to reach somebody at infios.com than it was at Körber-supplychain.com. So it's much more
little shorter, yeah.
Yeah, it's a much more user friendly way to reach us. But also when we think about Körber, there's this Körber Supply Chain Automation, Körber Supply Chain. There was some confusion in the market. We wanted to help clarify that, especially as we are now a joint venture between KKR, the private equity organization, and Körber. So we need to have a bit of a differentiation there. So we are today a supplier of all things warehouse executions from a technology perspective: warehouse management, transportation management, order management, labor management, XMS in the warehouse, if you will, with the addition of our ability to provide mobile robotic applications, of which we're recognized as one of the top, if not the leader, in integrating this technology globally, as well as voice solutions for the warehouse. And it also sort of came about, I want to say 6 to 8 months following our acquisition of MercuryGate TMS.
Okay.
So we acquired the MercuryGate TMS, rolled that into our portfolio. Part of the joint venture and the efforts between KKR and Körber is, how to identify the holes or the gaps in our portfolio. So about 2 years ago, we acquired the order management functionality out of Invista and the freight audit and pay. We rolled that into our platform and our applications. We acquired MercuryGate. We rolled that organization. So we continue to make investments in the technology portfolio, both through acquisition and organic development.
Interesting. So a lot going on there, definitely, and a lot under that umbrella, which I think is a great thing. So, but you mentioned a lot of software there. So tell us, I guess maybe the relationship there on the robotics side, right? Because robotics is driven by a lot of software, but there's also the hardware component too. So tell us how that kind of comes together.
Yeah, great. That's a great question, Kevin, because it's often overlooked, right? You see the robot, so you say, "Oh, there's a cool robot doing some cool stuff,"
Yeah.
But you don't realize, right? A robot really isn't capable of doing anything without the software architecture that it's tied into and that it's performing against, right? You know this, others may not. My background, I was an industry analyst for about 5 years before rolling into the role that I'm in today, and as such, had done a lot of market research on how the market for mobile robotics is going to evolve in the warehouse. But it was all fundamentally based on this idea that it was software-defined automation, that the software was the important piece, and the successes in the market were going to be driven by those that were able to adequately deliver on the software side of the functionality and really the tool sets that make the robots work efficiently. And so when I joined High Jump at the time, then Körber, then Infios, right? That it was just that rebranding progression.
Sure.
It was around this idea that, hey, do you want to keep telling the market all these great things, or you want to come help us build a business unit that can take this technology into the market segment that we participate in, because it does align so nicely to our software applications, right? You're not deploying a robotic system into a warehouse unless you've already got a warehouse management application in place, right? And so as an analyst, I had the opportunity to meet with the folks at, you name it, WMS organization. You look at the Magic Quadrant and determine who the companies I had the opportunity to speak with. And the story going back to 2016, 2017 was, you need to have a strategy around this solution area, because the companies that are building and supplying mobile robots, they're going into your customer base, right? So why not figure out a way to, build a business function that leverages that and allows you to bring more robust functionality to your existing customers? And so that's sort of how I landed where I am and how I'm still here, right? We have automation function of our business, yet our AMR business is most successful and resides within our software business, because there are such tight linkages between the information coming from the warehouse management and tying that back into sending the orders and inventory management over to the robotic application, executing the tasks, and then sending the correspondence back. So there is typically a tight integration requirement between the AMRs, and that's whether it's goods to person like Geek Plus, or person to goods like Locus, or even even the great things we're developing relative to Dexory and their cycle counting robot, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and I love that explanation there, because I think it is. You kind of said it very well there. That you see the robot and you're like, okay, this robot's doing something cool, and you think about the robot itself, but really, maybe this is a broad statement, but the robot is kind of nothing without the software behind it, right? To function and tell it what to do exactly, and where to go, and what to do next, and all those commands that need to happen for that. So very interesting there. So now we have to, of course, see what you think about the robotics landscape right now in the warehouse. So what are you seeing out there? What's kind of exciting to you? What do you think is a struggle right now? What are you seeing in the market currently?
Yeah, the market's continuing to evolve, Kevin, right? Yeah. We see both on the buy side and the supply side, right? The companies, there's a handful of mobile robotics specifically, not just there's stuff going on all across the world, and we can talk broadly about that here momentarily. But from the mobile robotics landscape, there's a handful that have really been exceptionally successful, and a whole bunch of folks that are trying to figure out, how do we capture the successes that these others have had, right? And each geographic market, we're seeing some differences, right? We're seeing a different customer profile, a different design construct, a different approach to the mentality behind the technology in the North American market than we are the European market. I'd say the Australian market, we do quite well there as well, as more akin to the US market, but there are still some noticeable differences. Yeah, I'd stated years ago, like 2018 even, that there was probably going to be another year of burst, and then in terms of the growth of the participants in the space, and then there had to be some sort of consolidation, acquisitions, mergers, and then natural attrition. We saw some of that piece happen, but we continue to see new robotics vendors come into the market. There's an abundance of choices for the customers, and that's one of the biggest observations is, it's no longer when you walk into a warehouse and you talk to the warehouse ops manager, you say, hey, have you thought about mobile robots? Like, no, I didn't even know that was an option for my warehouse, right? That's what it was back when we started doing this business unit in 2019, 2020. It was, we were evangelizing the technology, and today you walk in there and like, yeah, I've already spoken to this one, that one, this one, right? I've spoken to Geek and Hi and Locus and Libya, and this one works for us. We don't think this one does. So now there's a lot of knowledge out there in the market, right? There's educated buyers, but there's still such a robust ecosystem that there is a lot of decision support opportunity there for folks out there to narrow down what I like to say is a best fit solution, not any fit solution, right? Because you can drop in, I named several players just a moment ago, and every one of them is vying for the same project oftentimes, right? And each one of them, as a vendor supplier, rightly is highlighting why they're the best fit for that opportunity. Oftentimes it comes down to, from my perspective, what's the operational objectives of the business, right? What are they really trying to accomplish today and over the next 5 to 10 years? What are the constraints that they're facing, right? Some businesses, I can't rip down this racking. I've got to work with what I've got. Well, that narrows down your options, right? Why look at something that requires a rebuild when there's other options that exist? There's some, like especially government contractors, that have mandates around where you can acquire the hardware. What percentage of the device can come from various countries. So there's a lot of decision factors that go into identifying what really makes the most fit for a customer. And that's in the mobile side. You're seeing, I think, a tremendous amount of recent innovation. The last 2 years, the ProMat, the Modexes, those events of trailer unloading. Right. And customers have been asking for that for, many, as soon as mobile robots hit the field, especially those warehouses that deployed them in the picking process, like, okay, what's our next big problem? Trailer unloading, right? And it's taken several years of innovation to get to a point where there's a good handful of participants, in that space. There's companies now with mobile robots that will go in with a robot on a mobile platform with a multi suction cup gripper that can reach in, pick up a parcel that's floor loaded, drop it onto a telescoping conveyor, and automate that function. And then you've even got multiple vendors today that are capable of offloading full pallets, right, and loading full pallets onto the truck. And so that's all rather new. We've sort of seen that emerge here over the last couple of years. But I think the most recent evolution was, you go a year ago to Modex, right? And you had the emergence of like the Geek plus Pop Pick, and you had a handful of tote-based suppliers. Obviously, auto stores were there, OpExes were there.
Sure.
You saw totes. This year at ProMat, everything was tote, right? And it was almost an evolution from this, bring the tote to the person to how do we optimize that tote-based process, right? Because now you've got with Libya the Air Rob product, you've got a Geek Plus product that uses rack mounted gantry style robots to take totes out and deliver them to the more mobile robots on the floor without having a mobile robot do that. It's actually quite innovative because it takes a lot of time out of the process. And you still have those climbers like the Exotechs and the Highs. So the big story is there's a lot to choose from out there. Right. So on the front end of any decision is working to make, a decision that makes sense for the business, not just today, but over the long term. And then obviously piece picking. I think, Kevin, I'm really excited about this piece. I believe that piece picking is set for a major growth opportunity. And the reason is the explosion in tote-based goods to person picking, right? Because with a tote, you're putting a fixed cube into a same location over and over and over again. Right. And that's fantastic. You can maximize your picking velocity. Today, the way many of those work is you've got a put to light wall, right? So you pick your product from the tote, you walk your 5 steps or whatever it is, put it in the tote, hit the put to light button, and then turn around and walk back to your pick location. What I believe is the next evolution in that is you're putting the stuff in the same location, not for every product, obviously, right? The products that it makes sense. You've got a robotic arm picking from the tote, putting to a mobile robot on like a tabletop robot, like a Liebherr style robot, that then sorts to a 3D sorter. And now the big thing that really excites me here is, hypothetically speaking, you've got 10 pickers and 10 open orders per workstation, right? So you've got 10 open orders, 10 pickers, 100 orders. So each picker has the opportunity to pick the 1/10 of the opportunistic volume. If you can use a robotic picker and the sort of sorting that I'm talking about here, each presentation now picks to 100% of the available volume. What that means is if you're typically getting 1.5 units per every pick, but that's spread out across 100 orders or 10 orders, now that tote's going to the next workstation. Someone else is also getting 1.5. So that's 3 picks in sequence that were picked separately because they were distributed. We can create massive productivity enhancements by now the power of combining these different solutions. And that's going back to what we talked about before, driven by the software that's tying together these solutions. There's not one vendor that does all of those things. There's multiple vendors, and picking the configuration of them to execute to that idea. I think the state of the future of the warehouse is, we'll see some of them where the inventory is right, when the profiles are right, move to that sort of, humanless pick.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you asking the question, where's my stuff, too often? Whether it's in your own warehouses, from your suppliers, or in your customer network, if you're not sure where your stuff is, then Surge Air has the solution for you. With Surge Air's 99.9% accuracy, you're getting more than just supply chain visibility. You're getting the ability to orchestrate your supply chain and guide decisions in real time. Reduce the chaos in your supply chain and find operational truth with Surge Air. Find your visibility and learn more at surgeair.com. That's surgeair.com. Yeah. I think that's very interesting. And, the evolution there too is really interesting to see as well. And, you mentioned like in 2018 and I started the podcast in 2019, and that's when I started to get more exposure to all this stuff. And it's been wild to see just kind of what is even possible now, right? Like just 6 years later in that sense. But I'm curious your thoughts on, because you mentioned there twice, right, that there's an abundance of options, right? So do you think that is a positive, or is that potentially detrimental to the adoption of robotics in the warehouse?
That's a really great question, Kevin. I'll give you an anecdote here.
Sure.
I think it's both, right? Because when you talk about the options, you've got to be doing it different, right? You're either better, faster, cheaper, right? If you're coming to market and finding success, you're doing something differently. So that's good for the market, right? These different ideas, and there will be good innovations that go from one company and then get picked up by the next. And, that copycat mentality of, hey, someone did it this way. That's a really great approach. I'll tweak it and build upon it, right? And that's sort of the state of technology today. So I think that's good. I think the downside is the risk of making the wrong decision, and then you create a business that may have, some skiddedness around the market in general, as opposed to the acceptance that, the wrong decision was made, we missed the right decision. Let's pause, step back, and reevaluate, right? Very, very rarely do you see that. We are working with a customer that's had some similar circumstances. Decision was made, wrong vendor, hadn't worked out, and now we've got an opportunity to come in and evaluate things a little bit differently. So I think that is a risk. But overall, for the market in general, right, it's giving buyers more options. It's giving buyers, when we talk about finding the best fit versus any fit, there's more opportunity to find that best fit.
Yeah.
So there's, and that projects itself opportunities across a multitude of areas, right? Integrators, consultants, advisors, right? Opportunities for someone that's doing a project at XYZ warehousing company to become an expert and say, you know what, I've got this unique set of skills that I can go share with other companies that work in this space based on this newly found approach. So I think there's a lot of generic growth opportunities that will present themselves, broadly speaking. I think the major positive is, again, that there are more choices. It makes it more confusing, more challenging to find that best fit.
Sure.
But it gives you a higher opportunity to get a best fit.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting perspective there. And I'm curious your thoughts, because you mentioned in there where, like this project you just mentioned, right, where, they made a wrong vendor choice, didn't go so well, and now they have to rework it in a sense. And this has come up in a couple conversations over the last couple months that I've had where, some of these projects, right, when you look at robotics and automation are, they're quite expensive, right, or can be, right, and can be not only expensive from, just the money perspective, but also from like a time investment in the project to, initializing to getting to that go live point. And what's come up in some of these conversations is that, the person who's proposing the project or trying to, or is, saying like, okay, let's do the project, like could be a make or break in some position. And if the wrong decision is made, that could be their job. Right. So do you see that more options coming into the spectrum? Is that lowering the barrier to entry from a cost perspective, from a time to deployment perspective? Is that making it a little more accessible so the projects are maybe smaller or a little easier to bite off than they have been kind of traditionally?
It's a great question. I'll tell you, a pilot can be, a small 5-figure project.
Yeah.
We did a $20 million pilot with a customer who just chose a primary building that if this works, we'll make it bigger. Right. So there's differences there. I think the risk of failure, as you mentioned, it's not just the dollars, it's productivity, it's lost productivity, it's business, it's brand value, it's trust. Right. So it is really important to, spend a little bit more time on the front end, validate how you're making the decisions and, evaluate your suppliers, right? Do they have, success stories that, look like yours in the same industry? Yes, no. If not, do they have ones that are related? Can they translate well to our industry? Do they have the same technology stack, right? Because there's that component of the different pieces that you tie together. WMS, one WMS and the other WMS and the same robotic vendor might have different outcomes based on who ties them together and how all that works, right? There is no single silver bullet. These are, they are projects. But it does come down, like any project, to how much work you put in on the front end to plan so that when it comes time to execute, you've got a nice playbook written that's going to guide you through that process, and ensure you've got the right teams involved to move the needle when it comes time to put the robots into action, right? Because tying it together both digitally, as we talked about, start going full circle back to the beginning of the conversation, that's on the software side of things. So you've got to have the ability to tie the two different operating systems together to maximize the value and know what changes can be made, where you should be making changes. And one of the hardest things we find, Kevin, is in these projects there's the want versus need, and sort of determining, you want this feature, but is it going to create value, or is it a vanity feature? Right? Is it something you want because you think you want it, or is there a tangible outcome attached to deploying that feature? Because whether it's the software side of the application or the execution side, you can do things in abundance of ways. So there is a high degree of thought that needs to go into the way in which you configure these systems, and many are different. You might have two buildings that look very similar and might have a different approach because your inventory strategy might be different, just as one basic example.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting there because, like thinking of just a pilot proof of concept that's 20 million, right? I mean, that's like, some of the mid-market smaller guys would be like, what, 20 million just to, just to try it out, basically. But I think there's such a broad spectrum there to navigate and figure out and where does these things actually land. It's very interesting to see how some of these companies are approaching that and even now targeting like that smaller customer potentially too, with a solution that is fit for them versus looking at the bigger guys and chasing like those big names instead, right? So very interesting to see the landscape and how it's kind of evolving. So now let's talk about humanoids. So this is everybody's favorite discussion, I think, right? I'll just leave it very, very simple. I mean, what's your view on humanoids in the warehouse?
Super cool.
Yeah.
I think they're really cool. Yeah. The humanoid space is obviously, as you mentioned, right? There's a lot of hype around it, a lot of investment going into the technology, a lot of different designs going into, how they're shaped. I think one of in the warehouse is the specific piece of the conversation, and there's workflows where there can be some value added, but I think you said it well at the beginning here. There's a split. There's folks that are really, really bullish on the topic, and there's folks that are, rather bearish on the topic. And, there's a smaller group that's in the middle that's kind of like, oh, well, if then, right? Can it work? And let's give it a shot. We're seeing movement in both camps. I've seen a major investment by GXO was announced recently. They made a partnership with Agility to put a number of those devices into operations. I believe there was an announcement around Amazon and a similar, pilot sort of approach. But those are two big names, right? With innovation at the core of what they do, right? I think that's one of the things that's really separating where you're finding the bulls versus the bears in this market. If innovation is at the core, is at the fabric of the business, then you've got folks in the business that are really, championing that message. If execution and productivity and value are more important than innovation, you might be more on the bearish side of the camp. And I say that largely because that's what the economics are showing us of these solutions, right? They're doing very, very cool things. And they're also very new, right? We're also at the early stage of the life cycle of the technology. So, we'll see in short order the pendulum swing from one of those camps to the other based on the successes or lack thereof that start to happen in the market with the early movers, right? One of the things that stands out to me, and I've asked this a few times, I think I had the opportunity to be on a discussion at ProMat, right? And the question is, and I'll pose it to you, if you've got to get somewhere quickly and most efficiently, right? How are you going to get there? Are you going to walk? Or are you going to put on roller skates or a bicycle or get behind in a car? Yeah. Right. Assuming you're not taking the stairs. Let's knock that one out right there. If you're going somewhere, you have to get there most quickly and most efficiently. You're going to have some mechanism that rolls because it's faster, it's more efficient, more energy efficient. We're seeing a lot of the development and innovation. I think it's super interesting, and I do have a perspective on why it's a very important place for the investment to be going. But the investment into bipeds is where I just have to ask myself that question, right? Can a robot move into position faster and more efficiently than a human? Because if it takes the robot 2, 3, 1.5, doesn't matter, any multiplier of what it would take a human operator to do the time, then you cost justify the change, right? There's workflows where it 100% I think makes sense. Even again, unloading trailers, that's an expensive piece of equipment to be used for that purpose. But does it work and give you the flexibility? Perhaps. I'm more excited about the technologies and innovations that have come out of that industry and then been fed into other areas, right? Like you go back to when did Atlas first do a backflip? 2017,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you've got a manually controlled biped that does a backflip. And it made a lot of news because it was a really neat video. It walked out the door and they hit it with sticks. I don't know if you remember any of those videos. Like someone hit it with a hockey stick and knocked it down and it jumped back up.
I don't remember that part, but
Oh my God, super viral video. And I remember thinking to myself, these robots are really cool, but what is the practical application of a backflipping robot? Right? How are we going to use that? Are we going to, they're not going to be doing gymnastics on the floor at the Olympics.
Yeah.
So why just do that? But the ability to make the robot do that, the gyroscopic motions, the balance, the sensors, everything that went into making that happen, right? Those tools then found their way into other technology areas, into the development of something else. And so I really am very bullish on the continued innovation here, both from a software and a hardware perspective, because that means we're getting better at solving the most complex problems that exist, right? You look at the combination of mobility and dexterity and go back to the very early days of mobile robot, well, not the very earliest of days, but like 2018, 2019, right?
Sure.
Earlier days. I Am Robotics was a company that had a go-to-market strategy. It had a really interesting robot. It was a mobile robot with a robotic arm that could grab things off of a shelf. But there were still challenges because now you're not solving one problem. With the mobile robots, you're solving one problem. You go point to point and something happens. But when you put the dexterity and the gripping on the mobile platform, now you have to put it in a very specific location, right? You're limited by up and down movements, things of that nature. So you start to limit what it can do. And you're solving a very complex problem. The question you have to ask yourself is that combination of problems the one to be solved that's going to create the most value at that point in time? Maybe not, right? There was other investments into just baseline AMRs.
Yeah.
But we're seeing companies now come back to this idea of mobile manipulation, right? There's several companies now that have mobile robots with the ability to grasp and transport together, or even grasp from one tote, put to another tote, and then put the first tote back, right? There's a number of different iterations. So we're seeing continued evolution there. We'll see the same thing in the humanoid space. I think really good, really interesting what they're doing at Agility. I think from what I've seen, they're one of the more far along suppliers of that technology, right? I mean, the ability for the legs to bend in a way that they do to go all the way to the floor, to pick something up from the floor, pop up, and carry it. But again, the question I've got to ask myself is, are we solving a problem that we're doing something better, faster, or cheaper than other ways of doing it? And that's always the questions we want to be asking ourselves. I think we'll get there eventually. I think we're pretty early in the hype cycle. Would be where I feel about the humanoids today.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts there, and I think it is, and yeah, I definitely agree with you on the agility front. I mean, I think they're the ones, I would say, like, they've kind of put the flag in the sand, so to speak, to say, like, we're going to do this for warehousing, right? And certainly have proven. I mean, they're one of the only ones that are bipedal that have, like, shown at ProMat, shown at Modex, like, been out there actually working. We see videos of some of the other ones, but there are some questions around some of those videos I think I've seen out there. But really interesting, and I'm curious your thoughts on, because you mentioned there about the wheels, right, versus being bipedal, having these robotic feet, I guess, or legs, right? I mean, what do you think about that debate? Like, if you look at somebody like a Reflex Robotics, right, who also made a lot of noise at ProMat earlier this year, what do you think about the debate there where, a true humanoid is bipedal versus a humanoid with wheels is not necessarily like a humanoid? And I guess maybe, another layer there to that is, like, how do you feel about where there's a human kind of in the loop doing some teleoperation like Reflex has in some instances?
Yeah. That's a great question. That's a very deep question.
Sure.
I'll answer it very shallowly. I think humanoid, the idea is more about, does it look and feel, have two arms, have a facial, construct, things of that nature. Because we've got to consider Pepper and Jibo, right? Recently discontinued, but they were considered humanoids. They were very earliest of home-based humanoids, right? So no, I think it would be interesting to me, and who knows, maybe it's there. And I apologize if I'm letting in cats out of the bags, but if because I have no knowledge of this, by the way, Kevin.
Okay.
But it'd be interesting to see, agility on roller skates, right?
Mm.
Wheels, biped, but the wheels will get you there efficiently, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
That then sort of takes that argument and says, well, here's what we did to address that question. I don't think it's much of a debate. I think, a true humanoid, you can, if you're making one with legs, then with a biped is a true humanoid. If you're not making one that's biped, that's on a pedestal but still has the arms and the waist mobility and so forth, then no, it doesn't have to have legs, right? I think that's more of a perspective question. I'm sure there will be a standards document written at some point to properly define what a humanoid is.
I'm sure.
RIA might be already beyond that.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily have a lot of concern one way or the other there. I for the warehouse, to me, it's all about the outcome. What can you accomplish with the tool that allows your warehouse to move more boxes faster and less expensively, right? And if you find a biped can do that, then let's double down on how do we make that efficient for our warehouse operations. And human in the loop. Look, I think that's a great approach to solving the more complex problems. And we see it not just with the bipeds or the humanoids, but even the robotic arm benders,
Sure.
right? And I mean, wasn't it Ghost Robotics had the fork vehicle that was autonomous, but had a human in the loop to operate it if it got stuck, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to train physical technology in the real world with the back end support so that you don't disrupt operations and you can still deploy innovative solutions, right? The human in the loop gives you the confidence that, hey, if it gets stuck, if for whatever reason its vision systems can't see the thing that's in the corner of the tote, but we can see it with the camera and know it's there, we can get someone to manually manipulate that tool to get in there and see it. And then in doing so, what we're finding with these vendors is there's AI attached to that then sees the motion, sees how it was found, and learns that, oh, if I'm being presented this box and I don't see something, I need to check that corner. And this is how I get into that corner to get that unit, right? I mean, that goes back. There's been several folks that have been doing that sort of human in the loop training for many years. I mentioned a couple of them here a moment ago. I'm all for that. There are folks that will question, say, well, why should I need a human in the loop if it's automation? And I'd argue, why wouldn't you want that security blanket if that option exists, right? Because it just means that you have less errors, less failures.
Yeah.
You've got the ability to automate everything, automate to 90%, and then have a human step in, and you as the operation don't know that human stepped in. Well, you do. You'll get a digital record, but it'll happen, and you won't have to take somebody out of your operation to go physically make a change to what's happening with the automation solution. You've got someone virtually guaranteeing the output, right? And as a warehouse operator, it's the output that you're really, you really want to be concerned with, right? How many boxes can I get out my door as least expensively as I can in my 8, 16, 24-hour window?
Yeah. And I love the thinking there, because that is very true, right? I mean, if, there is an exception, right? Is it now as the operator, like, oh, I got to stop what I'm doing. I got to run out to aisle 33 because, the robot doesn't know what to do next, right? And I gotta correct something there, right? And not having to worry about that, I think, is certainly the big win there and being able to do that. So I love that perspective for sure. So very interesting to talk to you here, John, and get some of your perspectives and hear what you're seeing out there in the robotic space for warehousing, and kind of maybe some of what's coming up as well. It will Digit wear roller skates? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out on the next episode. But I do really appreciate the insights and really kind of digging into some of what's going on out there, and even the perspectives around the abundance of solutions too. I think is really interesting, because that's certainly something comes up in a ton of conversations, because it is quite quite overwhelming in some regards to what's out there these days. So really appreciate you coming on the show again, and looking forward to the next time we can get you on. But if people want to learn more about Infios or get in touch, in the meantime, what's the best way to do that?
You can find us quite easily at Infios.com. You can check out our solution suite, and or you can find us on LinkedIn as well. Right, we're in the digital world. We're only a click away.
All right, awesome. We'll definitely put that at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes, so people can easily find that. So, John, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.